back, everybody. We are back with Social Studies in Isolation. Today we are diving into the world of world history. Haven't done much there. We are going to talk about the Black Death. So as we experience a very large pandemic in America and the world right now, which is very serious and not to be taken lightly, we're going to talk about a far worse pandemic that hit all of Asia and Europe during the Middle Ages. So we will talk about this time period. The Black Death, the pestilence, the Great Plague, the Bubonic Plague. Most people, when they hear the plague, this is the one they're talking about. So let's get down to it. So where did this start? So we hear oftentimes about the plague hitting Europe and the massive damage it did, which is true. But it actually started in Asia. It started in China. Sound a little familiar? Yeah, not a great track record, China. Anyways, this starts in China all the way back in the 1300s, the early 1300s, and it is technically known as the Yersinia pestis, which is a bacteria that lives in fleas that rides on rodents, especially rats. So when we think of the plague, we usually think of rats. So these rats are running around China and they're infecting people, but China is pretty spread out, and so it takes about 15 years before this really impacts people too much. You don't see like today where it just blows up all over the world. It takes 15 years and about 25 million people die throughout China by the time it's all said and done. But then it is going to start to move towards Europe, and there's a lot of theories to this. It's hard to get exact, but my favorite theory is that the Mongol army they were attacking the city of Kaffa, which is on the Crimean Peninsula. They were attacking the city and they started to get infected with this plague. And they said, oh my goodness, we're all going to die. How can we change this? And so they started catapulting bodies over the walls into the city of Kaffa that were infected with this. So a person died of the plague, they load up the body, they launch it over the walls. You imagine what happens to a body when it hits the ground, explodes all over the place, and the people of Kaffa are going to be infected with this. And as they surrender and they run away, they retreat and they hop on ships. These rats with the fleas are going to be with them, the disease is with them, and then they take it back to Europe. And Europe is what we hear about most of the time. Now the problem with Europe specifically is it's more densely populated. People are closer together. And if we've learned anything with social distancing is that the more people you have together, the worse the situation can be. So between 1347 and 1352, so in only 5 years, it's going to just absolutely spread all throughout Europe. It's going to affect, estimates are all over the place, but they say somewhere between 25 million, 75 million, probably around 50 million people in Europe. They don't really have great medical records, so it's hard to know exact numbers. So let's say 50 million people. 50 million people throughout all of Europe, which is huge at that time period. It's about 30 to 50% of the population. So imagine half of the population of your city, of your country, of your whatever, being wiped out by one disease. So this is why we find it so important to do some of the things we have today. So what was it like? What were the symptoms of this? Well, quite the doozy here. Symptoms included fever, chills, weakness, stomach pains, diarrhea, vomiting, bleeding from the mouth, buboes all over the skin, blackening of the extremities due to gangrene. So take about every disease, lump it up into one, and it sounds like a pretty terrible way to die. So 50 million people throughout Europe are going to be infected with this disease, and it spreads very quickly. Now, one of the problems with this and why it spreads so far throughout Europe is just a lack of knowledge and education. They don't really understand entirely how this is happening. They would have plague doctors. Here's a plague doctor up here. A plague doctor would be not really a very official doctor. These are kind of second-rate doctors that would go into people's home and charge them large fees to cure the disease. Some of their techniques, they're very religious, so there might be religious techniques. Otherwise, bloodletting, which is basically cutting, trying to take out the infected blood. They would take frogs and leeches and attach them to the sores to try and take us out. And they would try and do all of these different things. They wore this kind of crazy costume that you see here. The long beak would be filled with aromatic like flowers and things. And the idea was that was going to filter the air and it was going to clean them somehow. So obviously not very effective. Another problem is that these doctors then go from place to place and cause problems. Another group that did this was priests, religious figures. They go into a person's house to pray over them, give them their last rites, and then they go to the next house and the next house, and they are in fact spreading this disease all over the place. So this disease spread very quickly, it spread very fast, it had a very high mortality rate. We don't have hospitals and doctors like we do today, and so that is the toll of this. So 75 to 200 million people, it's estimated, across the whole world were affected by this. As we said, 30 to 50% of the population of Europe. So nearly half of our population wiped out by the bubonic plague, the Black Death, in the 1300s. Obviously, it eventually stops. How do you think it stops? Imagine that people start quarantining themselves. They start social distancing before it was really acknowledged. They stay away from each other, and lo and behold, the disease is going to slowly dissipate and it's slowly going to be taken out of Europe. One of my favorite legacies from the Black Death, from the bubonic plague, is one that you certainly know, but have never realized.
Around the rosy, Papa Rosy, Asher, down.
So that's obviously a very famous little rhyme you've said probably when you were a little kid a million times. And it's actually all about the Black Death. So think about the words, ring around the rosy. This is talking about the rings that would be around the diseases. A pocket full of posies. They would fill their pockets or their shirts, whatever, with flowers, with posies to try and clean the air. Ashes, ashes, we all fall down. Ashes referring to eventually they can't even bury these bodies. They have to start burning the bodies to completely get rid of the disease and have enough room for them. So that's the ashes, and we all fall down is talking about the massive amounts of death that take place during the bubonic plague. So wonderful little kids' nursery rhyme. Next time you see little kids spinning in circles and falling to the earth, think of a massive pandemic wiping out half of the world's population. So that is a short history on the bubonic plague, on the Black Death that took place in the 1300s. If you have any more questions about this, I encourage you to do some more research, look into more of this. Very fascinating time in Europe the Middle Ages were. So have a great day, stay healthy, stay safe, enjoy what you can of the nice weather. Hopefully we're not getting too much rain. So have a great day, everybody.